Some of what appear to be the simplest little items are more involved than larger pieces. They get very complex in terms of what it takes to make them or to make them look good and work well. You just see them as something, a simple little piece, don't realize what's involved behind the scenes. So here we have a drawing, my drawings of hood latches. Specifically, I was making the base, just this little area part for the hood latch to mount into and that we'll pivot off of. We show some of the research photos that were involved, showing the hood latches from different angles so I could see all of that as well as seeing the base areas. And we have 17 tools, 17 various hand tools involved in the making of those bases. Not to mention materials, ruler, various blocks that are used for weights, mounting, sanding, sandpapers, plus my various close-up glasses and a pencil, all to make two little hood latch bases. They look so simple, but they are so involved. I already have had the latches mainly made, but what I don't have is the bases. And the base is this little portion just down here, which seems like it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. Sometimes the littlest parts are the most difficult to take you the longest rather than a bigger, more complicated part. So I have that, I've got photos. Now we've got some parts made, starting with just a couple of bare strips of styrene and then cut to size. Well, not exactly cut to size, they're a little oversized because I've got to shape them. They're bonded together now, glued, and with a styrene glue that fuses them. And now the next part is I'm going to work on starting to shape this the outer part to give it a little bit of rounding. And it's very, again, this is it's a tedious part. And you start it just with a little bit of with filing, going over on the edges. Then I'll be doing a little bit of sandpaper, and eventually I will round the whole outer area of this. So that's what I'm going to be doing next, and you'll see it once it's further along. I'm holding the part a little bit more so I can have a very firm grip on it as I try to slowly round out the edges. I'm going to be doing that with a little bit of file and a little bit of a sandpaper too, going back and forth. So it's just slow and it's tedious. The upshot is the end result's going to be getting to make the part end up being like this. So, and the reason that we have the two outside parts of the mount, which are carved out of one solid block, because that's going to give it a little more strength the way that I've mounted it to the base. So there is a method to the madness, and there's a reason for doing it out of a solid block rather than two individual pieces. Suffice it to say, it's the way that it's going to work best for this part and for it having strength as the latch has to move through it. This is part of the latch mechanism. So what you don't see here is the very little part, which is hinged base, which is going to go through there, but I'll show you that later on. All right, next thing, now I've got the top rounded, how more or less to where I like it. I'll probably do some touch up on it later. Next thing is just eyeballing the center and making a mark, which is going to be approximate, but it's pretty darn close. And that is where I've got to start a little bit of scoring. So, and this is I do it as a multi-step process. First, it's making a mark a little bit with a sharp blade, then a little bit with a file, and then with a saw cutting in. So you're going to see first with the blade going in. Don't want to slip with these because this is not a regular X-Acto blade. It's a carbide steel and also used for surgery. So it's really brutally sharp. And it's not something you want to catch in your lap if you drop it. Next, just a little bit with a little bit of this angled file, and just trying to get into that area. This is you can say that this is sort of akin to when you have to start a screw hole of using, screwing into something into wood. You may want to make a pilot hole. So I'm just making a pilot area for the blade to catch onto. So because it's too small, don't want to make these parts again and don't want to slip. So start it with something that's a little bit easier to control, but is not something that I can use all the way through or down because the file would be too thick. And there isn't a file that is really thin enough, even with these little jeweler files, and some of them are old Swiss-made pieces. I'm going to do that. Next, I'm going to start with a saw. A little fine saw blade. Again, this is something that is not exactly fun to do, but you got to do it. So I've got to hold it that well enough, and you don't want to. You've just got to ease it, and you kind of. It's almost like carving a meat or a steak or a roast beef. You've got to let the blade do most of the work. As you drag it back and forth, you don't want to push and you don't want to use a lot of force. So it's going to take a while for me to do this. So you'll catch up again when I've gotten further and I've done what I need to with this to do the cut channel. Aside from the fact that I've probably used about 10 or 12 different tools are involved in making this silly little part. Actually, I made 2 of these. As you saw the first one. And this is tape is another one of my useful friends and tools with this. I'm going to do this to hold this piece in place, and not just that, but then we're going to tape down the ends of the tape so that it doesn't move so much. And I don't want to put much tape on the part because sometimes that makes it really difficult to remove them, and you end up bending a piece, which you don't want to do. So nothing fancy, and I'm doing this, I'm putting it down here, and then securing it along. The more secured you have the tape, the better, and the less movement you're actually going to get in the part. So that's pretty important to hold it in place. All right, so now that's set there, and I am still going to use my finger too to hold it, and I've got my finger on it, and you're not going to be able to see anything with this video, but that's okay because I can still see, and that's the important part right now. Okay, and I'm going to do that and cut until I get down to where those, I call them little wings, the little end parts are. And then I'm going to work cleaning up the inside of the cut. Okay, now I've cut the channel in, so I've already down to the level I want it. So you can see just by my putting this little sandpaper in, that's that. I've made a couple of pencil marks. That's what the dark lines are on there as to how much I have to trim back, what I'm going to be cutting back with an X-Acto. And what I'm going to do is place the blade very much there. I'm going to put my finger up against that one post so that it doesn't go back when I push down. And I'm going to very slowly go down. And eventually that little excess will be trimmed out of there. But that's what I have to do. So I'm going to be cutting there. I'm going to cut on the other side, and I'm going to sand. Also, just so you know where these pieces are going, these are the lower body side panels that the lower part of the latch goes into. And I've located, I've made my markings. For one, I've done the drilling, and so you'll see where the part is supposed to mount. So it's going to eventually mount in there. And then there's a pin that will go through that, and then eventually the latch will go into there. It's a little hard to do the way I've got things now, but let's see if I can make it look a little bit better for you, just so you can see. Hold that out, and because these will be glued in place too. So one of the things is that the hood latch is made of multi pieces, and nothing is glued or set in place yet. So there we go. Let's see if it looks, and that's about how you're going to have it, and it is going to be hinged so it'll swing out. So, and there we go. Put that back in that little lid, which I use that so I can keep parts in not lose them, so you don't like having them just lying around on the workbench. All right, now I've trimmed back with the X-Acto. Well, I call it an X-Acto, but it's not. The blade, I've cut open the channels a little bit more. Then I'm taking a bit of a coarse sandpaper, and I am going in and letting it it's folded over, and just gently going back and forth, sort of letting it do its thing to smooth out, get rid of some of the rough, jagged areas. Then I'm going in with a finer sandpaper, fold it over. Actually, these are jeweler's sandpapers. These are from a jewelry supply house that I get, so it's not the average stuff you can buy. Can't buy it in a hardware store and can't buy it in a hobby shop. So, and then a little bit, just smoothing out. And then the final is, this again is a jeweler's polishing cloth. As far as jewelry, they make it in different grits. This is the coarsest, and that's going to go in there. And again, I'm just trying to smooth out, because I know once I paint these parts, there's going to be a little bit of paint buildup too. So trying to make them open enough and loose enough, and it'll be fine. And there we have, and I'm just going to work on the tops a little bit. And we're set for the next. This is just a simple little bit. Now the next thing is we've got to drill holes for the eventual hinge so that the latch can swing and pivot through the base. So this is an approximately right thickness of styrene that's going in between, and I'm just going to hold it in place with my finger, and I'm doing that simply so that when the pressure, obviously, that the parts don't get bent. I've made a tiny little mark with a pencil at the tip, and I'm going to use a very sharp scriber to go in, and I can't even see what I'm doing here without the light pointed in the right area. So I'm going to aim and get on to that exact mark. Do it slowly because you don't want to kind of mess it up. And then once I'm in, I'm going to twist it back and forth so I make enough of an indentation so that the drill bit will find it and will not slip, or won't slip too much. And then I'm going in by hand with the drill bit, and now I realize I've got to reposition the piece because the length of the drill is too short for where I have it on this. So I'm going to do a whole new piece of all the taping, and move it closer to the edge. I'm also going to cut off some of the wings. I'm going to make them a bit shorter. So that's it for the moment. Okay, so we've cut the wings a little bit, and we've repositioned on the block. Blocks, tape, basic things are actually really useful tools, more so than people realize. You don't need something elaborate, you just need to be able to think outside the box. So now I've got the drill bit, a little hand drill. It's a fairly thin bit, it's 15,000th diameter, so it's pretty darn narrow. And that's to accommodate a wire that I'm going to cut. Now let's see. All right, we're still going through there, because I'm going to show you something in a moment after I do that. Get it to go through. You pretty much know when it goes through. You sort of feel it. But even so, I keep checking. You can see it, you can feel it. And just about there. Yep, okay, it went through. All right, and that's the first one, and then there's a second one that has to be done. But the wire, again, this is a jewelry beading wire. This is the thin, this is what we're going to be using. See, it's pretty narrow. That's going to be the wire that's going to be used for the hinge that's going to slide through there and go through the bottom of the latch. So it's a step by step. So miniature reamers to open up the holes, because the drill bits only go so small or so big, and sometimes they go too big. So anyway, so this, what I'm holding here, is a very fine point reamer, but there's some that are even finer. Regardless, I have to open up the holes a little bit. I have both holes on for the hinge now, so I'm just going to go through, and it'll go to where it stops, and just open them up a little bit more, and then I'll just be going and doing a back and forth test fit with the wire until I get the right size, because I want it a fairly tight fit. I don't want it too loose. So it's just about ready to go through there. It's starting to. So it's just one of the keys to these things. Everything takes a while to do, but you have to be patient. If you rush it, that's when you screw up. So I'm not a very patient person with a lot of things, but when it comes to this, I've learned that I have to be. So I'm going to try it one more time, see if I've got it yet on that. Yeah, almost. Yeah, a little bit. So I don't know if you can see it, but I'm going to open up the hole a little bit more after this, just so it's a little bit looser, because once with paint and everything else, it might be a little too tight. But so I am just getting ready to see about shaping, cutting off, and rounding the edges or the wings or the ends of the bases, whatever you want to call them. Double check. I always like to look at my photos again, a little bit of reference. And I'm looking at the distance between the bolts and the outer, and just about what the curvature is. It's going to be approximate, and you eyeball it. It's also going to be so small, and once mixed in with so many other colors and shapes and things going on, it'll work out fine. You don't have to go crazy with these things. Just well, I go crazy with it, but you don't have to go incredibly crazy with them. So now I'm going to just take the pencil. Now I've got those little bolt bases are set in place, and I'm just taking a pencil and just going to mark for my, even though I probably don't need to do this, but I just want to do it for, it does help me a little bit by giving an approximate mark. The curve is not going to be quite right at what I'm doing, so I'm just going to adjust that, but I'll adjust it anyway when I'm sanding, so it's not really, it's not critical. It just gives me an idea of where to cut and where to sand. So I don't know if you can see that, but a little bit of line. So, and then the next thing is to cut off on both of them, and always leaving a tad extra, because that's going to get sanded down, sanded away anyway. You don't want to, you really rarely do you want to cut right on the line, because it just, what happens with sanding and sandpaper, it always goes a little bit fractionally further, 1 to 2 thousandths of an inch more than you think, and that is something that you almost can't see with the naked eye, but it does add up. The next thing I'm going to do is, actually now I'm determining as to whether I'm going to do that first. The ends have been shaped, rounded, they're all ready to go. I'm putting that part down again. I've got a separate piece of brass. I've already measured it out 2 millimeters in length. I've made a tiny little mark on it, and I'm going to get ready to cut it. Now I'm going to swing over to my drawer of tape, all sorts of different types of tapes, for different uses, different reasons. Don't ask me to describe them, because you will fall asleep from boredom. But anyway, now I'm just going to roll up a little bit. This is a fairly high-tack masking tape. I'm just rolling up a bit. This is just so that when I cut the piece, I don't lose it. Getting my nippers, and I'm going to get the piece and hold it. I'm looking for a little, there's a little tiny black mark that I've made on it. I'm going to line those up with the points, grip it, and then down onto the tape, and there it is over here. Usually it sticks to the tape, but anyway, it's close enough. And there's part, that's the pin, and that is going to be the pin in the base of this one, like I did with the other, with its sister. So that's it, and that will be the end, and then it will finally be ready for painting. And next up, we are just going to go to how I apply the pen. This is a drilling and mounting block that I use for a lot of things. You can see there are a lot of different holes. I'm going to try to line that up over a hole and tape down just to hold it in place a little bit. And another piece of tape at the other, on the other end. Doesn't need to be super strong, just enough to hold in place for putting in the pin, which I'm going to put in, but I am not going to glue it in. I'll glue it in after I've got it inserted. So insert it into the hole. You can see it's sticking up a little bit. And now we're going to slowly press it in. Okay, so that with a little flat file, that's in now. And because I don't want it falling through, so I'm going to go just to the end. So there'll be a little bit sticking up. And that should work. So just patting it down so that it's flush, so that there isn't any part that is going to catch on anything later on. And now that I've got that in place, the next thing I'm going to do, which I'm not going to bother to show you, is I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the top and a little bit of glue underneath to let it set, and then it will finally be ready. I know I've said it was going to be ready a number of times before, but this is finally going to be ready. And that's it.